This is not just another headline about Iran. When a former U.S. president says the next attack will be far worse, that's not rhetoric. That's a warning the world doesn't ignore. Something serious is building behind the scenes, and most people have no idea how close this situation really is. Here's the thing. Mainstream media will show you the quote, flash a banner, and move on. What they won't do is slow it down, connect the dots, and explain what this actually means for the United States, for Iran, and for global stability. In this video, we're breaking it all down, step by step, what was said, why it matters now, and what could realistically come next. And if you want clear analysis without noise or spin, make sure you're subscribed. Hit like so this reaches more people, and turn on notifications, because this story is far from over. When Donald Trump says something like this, it's never casual, and it's never accidental. When he warns that the next attack will be far worse, he's not just throwing out a dramatic line. He's sending a message to Iran, to Washington, and to the rest of the world. This statement didn't come from nowhere. It came at a moment when tensions with Iran are already high. Diplomacy is fragile, and the margin for error is extremely thin. Trump's words instantly raised alarms because they suggest something more than political rhetoric. They suggest preparation, intent, and escalation. What makes this warning especially serious is how direct it was. There was no ambiguity, no soft language, no diplomatic buffer. Just a clear message. Change your behavior or face consequences that will be significantly worse than anything before. That kind of language is usually reserved for moments when leaders believe deterrence alone may no longer be enough. From an American perspective, this matters because statements like these shape expectations. They condition allies, adversaries, and even markets to brace for what could come next. Iran hears it as a threat. U.S. allies hear it as a signal of potential action. And American citizens hear it as a reminder that conflict in the Middle East is never as distant as it seems. Trump has always used strength-based messaging as a strategic tool. Supporters argue that this kind of pressure forces adversaries to back down. Critics warn that it increases the risk of miscalculation. Either way, history shows that when language escalates this sharply, the room for quiet diplomacy shrinks. Another key detail here is timing. This warning comes as Iran continues to face accusations over its regional activities and nuclear ambitions. Trump's statement ties directly into a long-standing narrative that Iran responds only to force, not negotiations. By framing the situation this way, he's effectively saying the next move is Iran's, but the consequences are already defined. And that's where the danger lies. When both sides believe they're acting defensively, escalation can happen fast. A single incident, a single misread signal, can turn warnings into action. That's why analysts take these words seriously, not because war is inevitable, but because the path toward it becomes easier when rhetoric hardens. For American viewers, the takeaway isn't panic, it's awareness. Statements like this shape policy debates, influence military posture, and set the tone for what the U.S. may tolerate going forward. Whether this warning leads to renewed negotiations or deeper confrontation depends on what happens next, behind closed doors and on the ground. One thing is clear, this wasn't just talk. It was a calculated signal, and the world is watching how Iran responds. When Donald Trump talks about military power, he doesn't speak in abstractions. He speaks in signals. And this time, the signal was clear. The United States is not just watching the situation with Iran, it is positioning itself. By highlighting the movement and presence of U.S. military assets in the region, Trump shifted the conversation from words to capability. This wasn't just about warnings anymore. This was about readiness. Aircraft carriers, naval strike groups, advanced air power, these are not symbolic gestures. They are deliberate moves designed to be seen, tracked, and understood. For Iran, the message is unmistakable. The United States wants Tehran to know that escalation would not be theoretical. Any confrontation would involve overwhelming force, delivered quickly and decisively. This kind of military posture is meant to deter action before it starts, by removing any doubt about America's ability to respond. From the U.S. perspective, this approach follows a long-standing strategy: peace through strength. The idea is simple. When American military power is visible and credible, adversaries are less likely to test red lines. Trump has consistently leaned into this philosophy, arguing that visible force prevents conflict rather than invites it. But there's another layer here that often gets overlooked. Military positioning isn't just about foreign adversaries. It also reassures allies. Countries in the Middle East that depend on U.S. security guarantees closely watch these deployments. When they see American assets moving into position, it sends a message that the U.S. remains engaged and prepared to act if regional stability is threatened. At the same time, This posture raises the stakes. Large military movements narrow the margin for error. When forces are already in place, decisions happen faster. Reactions become more immediate. And that's why analysts describe moments like this as dangerous. Not because conflict is certain, but because the system becomes less forgiving. Trump's emphasis on readiness also puts pressure on policymakers in Washington. Once military assets are deployed, the question becomes not whether the U.S. can respond, but how and when. Every move is scrutinized. Every incident becomes magnified. The presence of force changes the psychology of the situation on all sides. For American viewers, this matters because these deployments aren't happening in isolation. They affect global markets, energy prices, and international diplomacy. They also shape public expectations. When leaders talk openly about military readiness, it conditions the public to accept the possibility of escalation if diplomacy fails. What's crucial to understand is that this isn't a declaration of war. It's a strategic posture, a calculated display meant to influence behavior without firing a shot. Whether it succeeds depends on how Iran interprets the signal, as a deterrent or as a provocation. And that uncertainty is what keeps this story moving. The military is in position. The rhetoric is escalating. And now, the world is waiting to see which direction this pressure pushes the situation next. This is where the pressure really tightens. Because when Donald Trump talks about Iran's nuclear program, he doesn't leave room for interpretation. His message is blunt: abandon your nuclear ambitions or face consequences, and do it fast. By framing this as a time-sensitive ultimatum, Trump is narrowing the window for diplomacy. He's not talking about long negotiations or drawn-out discussions. He's signaling that the era of patience is over. From his perspective, Iran has already had enough time, enough warnings, and enough chances. What makes this moment critical is how the nuclear issue changes the stakes. Military posturing can be reversed. Rhetoric can cool down. But nuclear capability is different. Once a country crosses certain technical thresholds, leverage disappears. And Trump's warning reflects a belief that the United States cannot afford to let Iran reach that point. For American audiences, this framing matters. Nuclear weapons are not just another foreign policy issue. They represent a permanent shift in global power and security. Trump is effectively arguing that preventing Iran from reaching that stage justifies extreme pressure, including the threat of force. This ultimatum also reshapes the diplomatic landscape. By saying, "Come back to the table now," Trump is putting the burden entirely on Iran. If talks fail, he can point to this moment and say the opportunity was there, and it was rejected. That narrative is powerful, especially in U.S. politics, where responsibility and blame shape public opinion. But there's risk built into this approach. When diplomatic options are publicly described as running out, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once leaders lock themselves into hard timelines and public ultimatums, backing down becomes politically costly. Compromise starts to look like weakness, even when it may be strategically smart. Iran, for its part, sees this pressure very differently. From Tehran's perspective, negotiating under threat undermines sovereignty. And history shows that when both sides feel cornered, negotiations become more fragile, not stronger. That's why this moment is so volatile. Each side believes time is running out, but for different reasons. Trump's demand also sends a message beyond Iran. It tells allies and adversaries alike that the U.S. is willing to use maximum pressure to stop nuclear proliferation. Supporters see this as decisive leadership. Critics worry it pushes diplomacy to the brink. For Americans watching this unfold, the key takeaway is urgency. This isn't a slow-moving diplomatic dispute anymore. It's a countdown. Every statement, every response, every delay now carries more weight than before. Whether this ultimatum forces Iran back into serious negotiations or accelerates confrontation depends on what happens next. But one thing is clear: the space between diplomacy and escalation is shrinking, and the clock is ticking. Iran's response was immediate, and it was defiant. Tehran made it clear that it will not negotiate under threats, and it warned that any U.S. military action would be met with a swift and forceful retaliation. This wasn't diplomatic language. It was a direct pushback against pressure from Washington. From Iran's perspective, agreeing to talks under intimidation would signal weakness, something its leadership has consistently refused to show, especially in moments of heightened tension. By rejecting Trump's warning outright, Iran is trying to flip the narrative, portraying itself as the side resisting coercion rather than provoking conflict. This response raises the stakes dramatically. When one side issues an ultimatum and the other refuses to comply, the situation moves into a more dangerous phase. Words harden, options narrow, and the risk of miscalculation increases. Iran's warning of retaliation is also meant to be taken seriously. The country has spent years developing asymmetric capabilities designed specifically to counter U.S. military superiority. Rather than matching America ship for ship or jet for jet, Iran's strategy focuses on rapid, unpredictable responses that could destabilize the region in ways that are difficult to control. For American viewers, this matters because retaliation wouldn't necessarily look like a traditional battlefield confrontation. It could involve regional allies, strategic waterways, cyber operations, or indirect engagements that ripple far beyond a single incident. That uncertainty is exactly what makes this standoff so volatile. Iran's refusal to negotiate under pressure also places diplomacy in a difficult position. Publicly, Tehran is closing the door. Privately, back-channel talks may still exist, but the public posture limits how far either side can bend without appearing weak at home. National pride and political survival now factor heavily into every decision. This is where escalation becomes most dangerous. When both sides believe they are acting defensively, each move is justified internally, even if it appears aggressive to the other side. That dynamic has fueled conflicts throughout history, often unintentionally. Trump's pressure campaign assumes that force and urgency will compel Iran to reconsider. Iran's response suggests the opposite, that pressure hardens resistance rather than softens it. And when deterrence fails on both sides, the path forward becomes unclear. For the American public, this moment is a reminder that rhetoric alone doesn't control outcomes. Actions, reactions, and perceptions do. A single incident, misinterpreted or mishandled, could rapidly escalate into something far larger than either side intends. Right now, both Washington and Tehran are drawing lines. Neither wants war, but neither wants to appear weak. And that balance, history shows, is one of the most unstable positions in global politics. This is no longer just a U.S.Iran issue. As tensions rise, the consequences are spreading far beyond Washington and Tehran, and the rest of the world is paying close attention. One of the first places this confrontation is being felt is the global oil market. Even the perception of instability in the Middle East is enough to move prices. Investors react quickly because the region sits at the center of global energy supply. Any threat to shipping lanes, production facilities, or regional stability sends a ripple through markets worldwide, affecting fuel costs, inflation, and economic confidence, including here in the United States. But the economic impact is only one part of the picture. Regional security is also under strain. U.S. allies in the Middle East are watching closely, knowing that a direct confrontation could quickly expand beyond Iran and America. History shows that conflicts in this region rarely stay contained. They draw in neighboring states, proxy forces, and international powers with competing interests. For American audiences, this matters because broader conflict means broader consequences. Military commitments grow, diplomatic relationships are tested, and global priorities shift. What begins as a bilateral standoff can evolve into a regional crisis with long-term strategic costs. There's also a psychological impact at play. As rhetoric intensifies and military postures harden, uncertainty becomes the dominant force. Markets dislike uncertainty. Diplomacy struggles under uncertainty. And ordinary people around the world feel the pressure through rising prices and increased geopolitical anxiety. Another concern is the risk of escalation through miscalculation. When tensions are high, even small incidents can spiral. A misread signal, a provocation by a third party, or an accidental encounter can trigger reactions that leaders didn't originally intend. That's why analysts warn that the most dangerous moments aren't always planned. They're reactive. International leaders are now weighing their positions carefully. Some are urging restraint, fearing a broader conflict that could destabilize global systems already under strain. Others are quietly preparing for the possibility that diplomacy may fail. This balancing act is happening behind closed doors, but its effects are already visible. For Americans watching this unfold, the key takeaway is interconnectedness. A confrontation thousands of miles away doesn't stay distant. It shows up in economic pressure, foreign policy decisions, and national security debates at home. Global conflict in today's world moves faster, spreads wider, and lasts longer than many expect. This is why the U.S.Iran standoff commands so much attention. It's not just about two nations exchanging warnings. It's about the fragile balance that holds entire regions and global markets together. Right now, that balance is under stress. And how this confrontation is managed in the coming days and weeks could shape global stability for years to come. This story is still unfolding, and the next move could come at any moment. What happens next won't just shape U.S.Iran relations. It could impact global markets, regional security, and the world order itself. That's why staying informed matters now more than ever. If you value clear, no-noise breakdowns like this, without hype, without spin, support the channel by subscribing. It helps us keep bringing you the full picture, not just the headlines. Drop a like if this analysis helped you understand what's really at stake, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next, because this situation is far from over. We'll keep watching, we'll keep breaking it down, and we'll keep you informed.